Right, so we've covered color and we've covered effects and we've covered color manager. Now the last thing we want to deal with really is light over here. So if I just collapse everything else and we deal with light as this subcategory and we expand it, we've got just a few options here: exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites and blacks. And these are very, very useful because you'll often find that when you look at the real icon in front of you and you look at your image that you photographed and put together, you'll find that certain things just aren't consistent with each other. So, for instance, you might find that in your real icon, the white clothing is actually just whiter in reality than it's been photographed, or vice versa. It's darker in reality, and the whites in the photograph are too white. So, if you find that generally the lights here, that the whites are just too white, you can actually take the whites and drop them, and you see that they darken, just the whites darken a little bit, or they brighten if you go too far here and it gets overexposed. So I'm just going to put it back at 0. And or you might find that you generally have overexposed the photo and it's just too bright in comparison to the real thing, in which case you can drop your exposure ever so slightly and bring it back to what it looks like in real life if you find that the icon is actually a little bit darker, or in fact in reality a little bit brighter. Do this very sensitively and only tiny bits, like only plus or minus 0.05 or zero point 0.1, that sort of thing, just a very small amount. Hopefully if you photographed it well, the exposure should be dead on, but if not, you can amend it ever so slightly with this, but certainly don't go to extremes. Otherwise, you're going to find that your image is very bright or very dark in reality. Contrast the same. Do this very sensitively. If you find that there's too low a contrast, you can boost your contrast or drop it slightly as it seems in the real icon. That's what we're really trying to get every time, what it is in the real icon. Highlights basically refer to the very brightest things, whether they're white or another color, the very brightest things. So actually the highlights in the image, in this case, really are the very brightest parts of the gold. So if I take the highlights and I drop them, it's going to try and recover some of the color and some of the depth that's been lost because it's been overexposed in these very highlighted areas. If I bring it out, you're going to see it's going to expose them even more to more light. So dropping them slightly is often a good thing for highlights. But again, try and look at the real image and see how that relates. But highlights can do a good job of just boosting a bit of contrast or even color back into the slightly overexposed light areas. Shadows relate to the darker parts of your painting. And if you find that in reality they're darker than they seem in the image, then you can bring them down here and you can see all the shadowy areas just become even shadowier, both in the face, up here in the shadow areas. So the darker colors become darker. Or if you find that they're too dark and in reality they're really much lighter, then you can bring up those shadows back in. So this is very useful tool. As with whites, very useful tool. Blacks are exactly as they seem. So if you've got any, especially very black things or black lines or particularly dark things, if you feel like, no, do you know what? In reality, that is blacker. It is less red. Then you can take that and bring the blacks down. You'll see that everything that is relatively dark goes blacker, or you can bring it back up. So again, use these very sensitively, very slightly. Zoom in if necessary to see just how much effect you're making, and zoom out to see the same thing. So blacks this way or that way can make quite a difference to the contrast. So use these sensitively, but get used to trying them because they are very useful tools, these light tools. Right, now we're going to go to something slightly more advanced, which is what's called gradient effects. So I'm going to take you to this fourth main category over here. And it's really masks, but ignore everything except for these two, a linear and radial gradient. And really, linear is going to be your best friend. Well, really, brush, linear, and radial are going to be your best friend. I'm going to mostly concentrate on linear. What you can do with these is if you've only really had one main light source and it's overexposed here on the right in comparison to the left, you can see the left side of the icon is slightly darker than the right because you can see where the right side has really hit that and made the gold and possibly even the painting slightly lighter. We're going to try and compensate that by saying, right, just the left hand side from here to about the middle, I want you to expose a bit more. So we need to draw a linear gradient. So we're going to draw a linear gradient and we're going to say create a new mask. We're going to say create a new mask here, and we're going to say a linear gradient. And I'm going to see, you can see the cursor changes to a cross. If I click here and drag, and even hold down shift to make sure it's at a perfect 90-degree angle, I'm going to say, right, from the very left hand side and disappearing by the time you get to about the middle, you can see the redness of my mask disappears by the middle. I want to, and you can see these now subcategories that you can affect with your gradient, your mask. I want the exposure to be brought back in. You can see that my left hand side is now getting the equal amount of exposure as I bring up the slider as the right hand side. You didn't really notice that it was underexposed until I overexposed it now. And if I go too far, you'll see I actually look like I've got a really bright window on the left hand side of the icon. Or conversely, if I find that I've got the left hand side overexposed, I can drop it. So if I drop it back to what it was, 0, this is where it was. You can see now if I lift it up just by a little bit, slide up the slider to the right, it looks much more like the right hand side, and you can see just how underexposed relative to the right hand side the left hand side really was. So a linear gradient is very important. So now that I've got this gradient here, I can make some effects to just that gradient area, and this is kind of a visual of up here what is being affected. The red in the mock-up is showing what is being affected 100%, and as you move towards the right, you can see that red mask actually becoming more and more faded until it reaches the middle and disappears. So it's only affecting the left hand side, disappearing by the time it gets to the middle. And you can affect any one of these, any one of the blacks, the whites, the highlights, even some color items. You can do any one of these, dehaze, clarity, so many things you can do with this gradient. Now if you find that you also have need for a gradient at the top or the bottom for any reason, for instance if the bottom happened to be less exposed than the top, which actually is true in this case, we can create a new mask, a new linear gradient, and go from the bottom upwards. From the bottom upwards, I'm holding down shift. I want it just to affect the first, maybe third, and I'm going to expose that a bit more. You can see as I expose it how much more similar it looks to the very top. And it's quite important to have the painting equally exposed on all sides. Top, bottom, left, right, ideally equally exposed. So I'll leave it there, and I think that looks really very good. Now if you've got an area of the icon in particular that you find for some reason that is really different from the rest, for some reason there's a shadow affecting it, ideally go back and photograph the 3 things properly and bring them back in. But if you don't have the opportunity, you can actually make a new mask which is either a radial or a brush mask. So I'm going to take a brush, and you can see the cursor changes to this weird thing here where you can literally paint in an area, and you can see as I paint it on, that area becomes redder and redder because it's creating a mask there, and you can see it reflected over here with how significant it is. Now if you'll find that it's becoming very red, it's becoming red very slowly. That's because the size and the feather are quite significant, and the flow. If I up the flow, you might actually find that if I paint in again, it becomes redder faster. So this little white area shows the area that's going to be, if this black whole box is the whole image or representative of the whole image, that is just the area that's going to be affected. So I can do that, and if I find that I've gone too far, I can actually erase some of it by saying subtract, and I can say subtract using a brush tool. I'm going to subtract some of what I just painted in, and I'm taking it away. If I keep going, I'm actually going to subtract the whole thing. So once you've done that, then you can go back and again affect any of those areas. If I boost the exposure, you see I'm boosting the exposure just in the area I've painted, or lowering the exposure just in the area I've painted. Generally, I would say try and avoid doing too many of these masks. Just try and do the fewest possible and get it right, ideally in the first photograph. So I'm actually going to remove this brush mask that I didn't like. I'm going to say delete mask 3, and I've just got my 2 linear masks, my 2 linear gradients, and that's enough for me. So I'll go back to my effects, and I'll just check that everything is as I want it to be. All the effects I've done seem right, and when I look at the image now on screen, it looks very, very similar to the real thing. And once I'm happy with it, I can go ahead and open it in Photoshop. We're going to come out of Camera Raw now, and it's going to open in Photoshop. Oh, sorry, you can excuse that. Here's what we just did. The first thing you probably want to do is now save this. So when you say File Save, it should be saving it now as a PSD. That's a Photoshop file. It's no longer going to save it as a DNG, which it already had done before. So I've still got disciple merge.dng, but if I say save now, I'm in Photoshop, it's going to save it in Photoshop. Now, a DNG and a Photoshop file are slightly different. When you open a Photoshop file, it's going to open up in Photoshop. A DNG file is actually going to open up in Camera Raw, the pop-up subsidiary app inside Photoshop, and you'll find that all of those sliders that you affected are still there, and you can make further amendments. So if I close this Disciples Merge PSD file, the Photoshop file, and I bring up again, let's see, where did it go? Oh, I've lost it, haven't I? Hang on, let me go back to the actual image. It was, what was it? ACOC, it was Final Photos, it was ACOC Disciples, and we were doing, who were we doing? We were doing Saints, forgive me, who were we doing? We were just doing Andrew, weren't we? So I'm looking for Andrew. There we go, Andrew DNG. So I'm going to open up this DNG file. If I double click it, it should open up in Camera Raw again, and all of the sliders that we affected, let's see, what did we affect? We affected the color mixer, and you can see on my greens, what did we affect? I've forgotten now. Forgive me, hopefully. Maybe I'm wrong. I thought it would actually show all the sliders as they should be. Well, this is rather embarrassing. I'll have to go back and figure out why that isn't as I expected it to be. But usually the sliders are showing the representative of what we've done. Okay, we'll cancel that. Anyway, we've got our Photoshop file. Maybe I've saved it in the wrong place. Oh, maybe I'm looking at the wrong one. That would explain it. Let me see. Where have I just saved that? Oh, have I saved it to desktop? Ah, there we go. I beg your pardon. I'm looking at the wrong DNG file. Right, so this is the DNG file I saved. So I'm going to open this. And okay, there we go. That looks more like the one I just edited it. So if I go to color, yes, indeed. Yeah, okay. So the things that I did with it are actually shown here, and hopefully now if I go to here, yes, I'll see my mask 1 and 2. So all these changes are still saved and changeable within the DNG file. So I've done that. I'm going to go back now to my PSD file. PSD file won't show anything except for the final kind of merged, edited image. And what we're going to do now is we're going to crop away any of the icon that we don't need. So the first thing I'll actually do is from the sides you can actually click and drag these guides, and you want to take it right up to the edge of the icon, and then just the slightest amount. I'm going to actually zoom in so that I know I'm really going in. I'm going to go to the very top of the icon. It actually aligns very nicely with the top edge of the side edge of the icon. I'm going to bring it in ever so slightly and go down, hopefully so that the guide is actually ever so slightly in the icon, so that when I crop this, there's none of this cardboard showing at all. It's just the icon showing. Now, if I happen to take it right to the edge, and we talked about this in the first video, you'll find that the board is actually ever so slightly warped. You can see it doesn't actually align. The icon itself has a gap here of cardboard. Now, this happens sometimes, and it's a very, very easy fix. What we want to do is we're going to go Command T or Control T if you're not on a Mac, and you're going to get this bounding box. The whole image is now in a bounding box, and if you right click, you're going to get some options: scale, rotate, skew, distort, perspective, warp. We're going to choose warp, and if we go to the area of the icon that we can see it's coming away from the edge, we're going to click and drag to the right ever so slightly, and that'll actually warp the image just around the area where my cursor is. So you should find it didn't warp any of that, and that's still nicely aligned near the top of the icon, nicely aligned, but the middle area has now aligned beautifully with this. If I just zoom out and I do a major extreme warp, you'll see just how this works. It kind of warps roughly around the area where you're affecting it with your cursor. If I just, for instance, click my cursor here and I pull around here, you can see just what it is doing and what I did. So I just did a very tiny amount. If you do it very tiny amount and very sensitively, you should find that it affects things nicely, and you can make just very fine adjustments which make perfect sense. Now, we saw this artifact when we made the panorama, so we're going to have to decide, right, okay, when we make a guide here, exactly where are we going to put this guide? We're basically going to have to either put it there, and we're going to have to fix this issue from here upwards, or we're going to decide to chop this whole area off and crop it to there. Now, it depends what you think you can afford to do, but we obviously want the icon to be symmetrical on the left and right. So what I think I will actually do is I'm actually going to put it around there, and we're going to chop off a little bit of the left hand side, but we are going to make up some of this. So we put a guide there, and I'm going to put a guide at the top as well. You'll see why I'm doing all this. Again, just slightly inwards of the icon, just slightly inwards of the icon, and we'll do it at the bottom again. The reason we're doing this is we want to crop the icon perfectly now to make a perfect rectangle. Okay, so we've got that, and I've got 4 guides. I'm now going to use the crop tool here, or you can press C to shortcut to it, crop tool, and I'm going to crop my image inside the guides, and it should like click and snap to the guides. And if I either press return or double click now, it's going to crop it. And you'll find actually there's an option up here whenever you've got the crop tool where you can click, right, everything that's been cropped, delete everything outside of it. Now, so if I actually click the crop tool now again, it doesn't show me any of the image outside that I've cropped. It's actually deleted it forever. But if I go back a few spaces and I say, edit undo, which is Command Z or Control Z if you're not on a Mac, I'm going to decrop, and if I deselect delete crop pixels and I recrop, even if I double click this now, the area, the image outside that I've cropped is actually retrievable if I want. So if I click crop, you can see I can actually bring back some of the image that I had initially deleted. Sometimes that's useful if you find you've overcropped and one day you want to return to the image and say, do you know what, I want that back in for some reason. It's unlikely, but if you want to, generally click that off so that you don't actually delete the pixels that you're cropping off. But there it is. And if you now say you want to remove guides, and I usually do this by Command and the colon tool that hides the guides, you can see just how much of the icon is still unnecessary. So I can see this highlighted area. I actually want to remove that, and if I go over here I can see that artifact and the weird thing it's doing. Now this is where we get a little bit more advanced. We're going advanced every step of the way. So what we're going to do is, this is our key image, and we're trying not to now do any more edits on top of this. We're going to make further layers if we want to make any edits. What I mean by this is I want to actually paint in some of this back in to make it nice and consistent all the way along top and bottom. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here and say plus, I'm going to create a new layer. Okay, so I'm not going to do any more edits on this layer, which is the original image. I'm going to create a blank layer, and if I just remove the visibility of my original layer, you can see this new layer has these weird kind of squares. These squares, that means that it is completely empty and transparent. There is nothing in that layer whatsoever. Even if I take a brush tool up here, I press B and I get my brush tool, and I take a white paintbrush, which is usually the color of paper, you can see I'm painting in white. Everything else is completely transparent. So for instance, if I click my bottom layer, you can see the white paintbrush is showing. Everything else around it's transparent. So anyway, I'm going to delete that. I'll go back a few steps. I've got my layer. Now what I want to do is I'm going to take something that we use quite often, which is called the clone brush, or the clone stamp. And what I want to do is, you should be given this circular cursor now. I'm just going to make it bigger by doing right square bracket. But but you can do this in many ways, but right square bracket is a shortcut. And if you press S, sorry, you'll get the clone stamp tool, that's the shortcut. Sorry, if you press Option or Alt, you're going to get this new cursor within the clone stamp, which you use to say, right, I want to use this, which I'm pointing at now, and I click, say from here, when I paint over here, I want you to clone what I just clicked there. So I'm going to start painting over here. You can see two cursors now. It's cloning from the right cursor. Now it's cloning rather harshly, and you can see there's a high contrast here. So I'm going to undo that, and what I'll do is I'll right click, and I'm going to say the hardness of the brush reduce all the way. I want this to be quite a feathered brush. We're going to hold down Option or Alt again, click in the area I want to clone, and I'm going to start painting. And you can see my brush is now feathered, and the clone is much less harsh, and I'm cloning all the way up. Now the best thing actually to do is to clone as close to the thing you want to delete as possible, and try and choose a thing or area that you want to clone that looks just like what you want it to be. So I'm going to clone over here. I'm going to Alt click here, and with my cloning brush I'm now going to just clone all the way up. You can even click and hold down Shift, and it'll clone in a line, nice straight line for you. And you can see I'm removing the unwanted, very highlighted areas of my icon. I want to remove this top area as well, so I'm going to click here. I want to clone this area, and I'm going to click here and Shift, hold and click, Shift and click, and you can see what it's doing. It's cloning just below it all the ideal gold the way it should look. And same here, I'm going to click, Alt click, click and drag to clone, or I can hold down Shift and click, Shift click, Shift click. I'm getting rid of, or rather I'm cloning the area just to the left of it so it replicates it. You're going to have to be very careful where you choose where to clone from, because if I, for instance, start to now clone, if I click here for instance, right, I'm going to say right, clone from here, and I start clicking here and dragging, it's going to start taking some of the clothing. You can see it's going to start cloning some of the clothing because that's where it's cloning from. So be very careful to try and clone close to the edge. If you can even clone from right next to it here, click and drag, and that would be ideal. I'm going to go all the way down and remove that harsh highlight. Same with the bottom. Clone, click, drag, click, Shift, click, Shift, click, and hopefully there we go. We've got a nice clean edge without any more stark highlights all the way around, except maybe in this top corner. Let's get rid of that top corner. Let's click the clone here, so that's Alt click, and then click and clone, Alt click, click and clone. There we've got a nice clean edge. It looks nicely consistent all the way through, and we've done that only on our top layer. So if I remove the visibility of our bottom layer, you'll see all those things we've cloned. It's just sitting as a layer on top of the original image, so it doesn't affect the original image at all. And that's called non-destructive editing, because it's not destroying anything of the original image. We've still got the original image completely unhurt. If I lose the visibility of the top layer, if I put it back, it's got the affected cloned edge. So once you basically have everything that you need done, you're ready to hit save, and you're ready to really check a few things before you send this to a printer. If you're really happy that this is very representative of the real icon, is perfectly straight, is perfectly symmetrical if you need it to be, and you're ready to send it. So one of the first things you need to check, this by default always happens when you shoot in RAW, is that the image is in 300 dots per inch, or DPI, which is the amount of DPI or dots per inch that a printer needs to make a high resolution print. The way you should know this is you go to image size, and you can see a few things that tell us about the image size. So the actual image that we've got is this many pixels, 3,489 pixels by 7,235 pixels. That's a very good size. If we were to print this now, send it to a printer, he could print, make a print 61 centimeters by 29 centimeters without losing any resolution at all. It would be perfectly crisp. That's the exact size of the image. Truthfully, if he wanted to, he could actually double that. He could make a 122 centimeter tall image, and that would also not show a visible degrading of the image. Bigger than that, he would start to show some pixelation when people go close to the image. And you can see the resolution is 300 dots per inch. Now, a print for a high resolution print is 300 dots per inch. When we're looking at a computer screen, what we're actually looking at is 72 dots per inch. So if you're saving this, or if you're going to make a copy of this and save it to send it to somebody who's only going to look at it on screen, in fact, all you need to do is save it as a 72 pixels per inch or dots per inch. And you can say 72, change that to 72, and you're actually going to have a much smaller file size. But generally speaking, when you're saving this for a printer, keep it at 300 because that's the high resolution print that you'll need. So leave it at that. If a printer needs to, if someone's ordering a print and they say, right, I only want to buy a print that is 40 centimeters tall, what you're going to do is you're going to save a copy of this, which is height 40 centimeters tall. You'll see that the width automatically changes so that the ratio of the image doesn't change. Nothing is stretched. If I go back to what it was, 61, and I unclick this little key here, which constrains the ratio, you can see it says do not constrain aspect ratio. If I change the height now, it'll actually not change the width. So if I change this to 40, it'll not change the width. You can see it in a preview, it squashed the images top to bottom. So always have this selected so that the ratio of the image doesn't change. I'll just go back and I'll re-click constrain the aspect ratio. So when you're making option size options on your website, and you're saying, right, I offer this image as a 40 centimeter tall, or as a 60 centimeter tall, or as an 80 centimeter tall, this is how you save it in those sizes. So I've changed this to 80 by 38 now. I'm going to say OK. I'm going to change that image to there. I haven't saved it yet. I'm not going to save my PSD file so that I don't change that. I'm going to save a copy file, save as, or save a copy. You can do one of these, either one. I'm going to save as, and I'm going to save as a copy. I'm going to save in JPEG format because that's all a printer needs. So save in JPEG format wherever you want to. You can say Disciples merge copy, or you don't even need to have the copy because you'll see that it's a .jpeg now, not a .psd. I say save. It'll then ask you, right, what's the quality of the JPEG that you want to save? Always choose maximum. Whatever you send to a printer, let it be maximum, which means that it's going to be the largest possible file with the least amount of compression, because once you save from a PSD down to a JPEG, you are compressing it slightly, so you are losing some information. So say maximum. If you choose minimum, you're going to go to a very low quality. You'll get a very small size, but you'll get a lot of nasty pixelation. Always save your JPEG as largest file. Say OK. Now, I haven't changed anything to my PSD file. I haven't degraded it, but what I have done is I've just changed the image size. So I'm going to edit undo image size change, bring it back to the original size. So if I say image size, what is the original image size? This is the original image size. We've still got our original image size. So let's say I want to save a copy which is only 40 centimeters tall. I'm going to save it there. The aspect ratio is constrained, so it's still original aspect ratio. I'll say OK. I haven't saved it yet. I've just changed the image size. It's now 40 centimeters tall. So if I bring up image size, you'll see 40 centimeters tall by 19.29. Still resolution 300 dots per inch. So cancel that. And then I can save a copy or save as. And format, I want to change it now to a JPEG, but it doesn't allow me to change to a JPEG until I say save a copy. Then change it to JPEG. And I'll save that as JPEG merge at 40 centimeters tall. Ideally, I would have saved this as 60 centimeters tall, and I might go and change that in a second. So I've saved a copy now, 40 centimeters tall, quality 12, maximum largest size, please. Okay. Now I'll just make sure before I save the PSD file that I undo my image size change, and I'll just check if I go to image size. Yeah, it's the original size of the PSD file, 61.26. So you can go up to, I would say, twice that size without losing quality. You can save 120 say centimeters. You're not going to lose quality as long as you go only up to twice that size on one of the dimensions. So I can say, yep, okay, change it to 120 centimeters tall. It's just thinking about it. If I use the magnifying glass and I double click it, it's going to zoom into 100% of the image. and I can see, is there any loss of quality? No, there's no loss of quality. If I zoom in more, you'll start to see the pixels. If I go really, really close, you can actually see every single pixel and what the color is made up of. But double clicking this will take you to 100% view. You can see, is it still quality? Yep, still quality. Although don't always trust the screen. So I'm going to undo that image size change, edit, undo image size. Just double check that I'm going to save my PSD file at exactly the right size. Yes, 61. So 61 by 29, 300. Right, great. That's the original PSD file. Now I can say save. And we've got now our original PSD file with all our changes. If I just close it for a second, the document will close after saving is completed. No problem. Okay. And I go to desktop again. I've got my original DNG file. I've got my 400 centimeters tall JPEG file. I can just change this to 60 centimeters tall JPEG file. And I've got my PSD file. So those are the kind of things. You'll need these two to send to the printer. And you'll need this to keep in mind any layers that you've made of edits, and these to keep in mind any changes you might want to go back to change in your Camera Raw file. Although there is a way that if you open the PSD file, this is a bit more advanced, and you want to do some Camera Raw changes, you can by going to whichever layer you want to make changes to, and say filter, and go to Camera Raw filter. That'll open up just that layer in Camera Raw again. It won't respect any of the changes that you made previously. It won't show you all the sliders at the right place like a DNG file will be. But you can now make some more changes if you really want to, just to that layer, and you can create all sorts of things to it if you wanted to. I said don't use the texture slider, so ignore the fact that I've done any texture slider changes, but let's say I'm doing dehaze. Anyway, you get the point. And once you've said OK to any changes you've made, it's going to bring that back into Photoshop, and it will have affected that layer. So in a sense, it will have destructively added or taken away from that layer. So I would avoid doing going back and forth into Camera Raw if you can help it. Try and just do all your Camera Raw edits in the first go, in the first pass, then come into Photoshop, save it as a Photoshop file, and generally then on only really make changes to your PSD Photoshop file, and just keep your DNG in case one day you need to return to the sliders and check what you'd done when you did that first edit. So there, hopefully you have an easy guide to making images ready for print, having photographed them well. And I'm just going to reiterate, getting the photographs right at the beginning with good lighting and getting all the photographs correct in terms of how the camera is angled towards the image is the most important thing. Get that right, and every domino generally falls in place later on. Get the photograph done badly, you're going to be trying to catch up and play, edit and fix job for the rest of your life. So get the photographs better rather than worse.